Okay, we continue with this series, this progression from a belief to a belief system to a poisonous ideology. And today, what I will do is give the basic anatomy of an ideology, the 10 aspects that you can see in order to identify an ideology. The first aspect or criteria in our examination and our analysis is that they have a charismatic founder who is a leader. And for a little while I'll give an example of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons we usually call them, and I'll mention Joseph Smith, who was the founder of this faith. He was a handsome man. He was charismatic. He was very convincing. And he is still looked upon as just a magnificent person. When he was age 14, he had a vision. He met God. And he began to realize that a new faith was necessary. Age 14, by the way, is very interesting in terms of charismatic leaders. For instance, Billy Graham, at age 14, decided upon ultimate truth, which led to the expansion of evangelical theology and the megachurches. But here at age 14, he has a vision. And all Mormons know of that vision that Joseph Smith had and how great it was for God to reveal himself. And then for a faith to expand, it needs some type of sacred writings. For Joseph Smith, that meant that he had to develop the Book of Mormon, which, according to him, was translated from an ancient Egyptian script by Moroni, M-O-R-O-N-I, Moroni. And Joseph Smith, as he developed this Book of Mormon, used a hat that had stones in it. He called them seer stones. And he would dictate his message as he stared into this hat, and a scribe wrote it down. He had several scribes. He would look down into the hat and say, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." He also created the Book of Mormon by getting translations of the golden plates. And so we have this sacred book that he developed by age 30, the Book of Mormon. So the second criteria in the anatomy of an ideology is a famous book, a book of sacred writings. Another thing that was characteristic of Joseph Smith as a young man, at age 14 he saw a problem. This is another characteristic. Man, charismatic man, book, sacred writings, and they have analyzed a problem in the society. At age 14, when you're going through such confusion as an adolescent, Joseph Smith saw that there were a lot of different Christian groups: Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Methodists, Baptists, and he said there's confusion about the story of Jesus. So he wanted to straighten that out with his religion. But every ideology will have some societal problem that captivates them, and then they begin, or the leader, and then he begins to try and come up with a solution, and does, in all these poisonous ideologies. Then you need a sacred history, a noble history, people who have conquered in order to come to this modern faith. And in terms of the Mormon or Latter-day Saints tradition, there is nobility. According to them, in 600 BC, a group of people in the land of Israel migrated and came to the United States and lived here. And these people were looking for Zion and setting it up in this country. And when archaeologists, and this is an aside, when archaeologists say there's absolutely no proof of that, then the Mormon defenders, the apologists for their faith, will say, well, that was the Mayans or the Aztecs, and they will talk about that. Even though the archaeologists will say, hey, the Aztecs and the Mayans show no characteristic of being coming from the Near East. They show African signs. Well, but anyway, you have the man, the problem, the book, and then you have a noble history. And of course, the Mormons do have a very interesting history, similar to the major march of Mao Zedong in the 20th century. They were kicked out of New York. They believed in polytheism, and they had several gods, and that was not good in New York. They went to Missouri, were kicked out of Missouri. Then they went to Illinois on a little peninsula in the Mississippi River, Nauvoo, and they were kicked out of that. And it was at Nauvoo that Joseph Smith was killed. And he was in a prison, and some people broke in and shot him. So they have a noble history of searching for Zion and then leaving Nauvoo and crossing the Mississippi River and going out all the way to Salt Lake City in Utah and establishing Zion there. It's a very interesting history once you commit yourself to this particular ideology. There is also a fifth factor, us, them. The Mormons versus the non-believers. At one time, it was the Nephites versus the Lamanites throughout way back in history. And so there is an us, them. And there is a sense, for a sixth factor, a sense of righteousness. They are the Latter-day Saints. And so they feel quite good about their history, about their founder, about Brigham Young, who led them out to Utah. It's a great history, and they have a sense of being the right people. And I might say that any ideology eventually moves to that. And I will talk about other ideologies that are not religious. But you have a sense that you have the right idea, because an ideology gives you a sense of total rightness, of being correct, of having the final truth. And then the next thing is you need certifications that prove that you are a belonger to their particular faith. And so one characteristic is that you tithe 10%. Another characteristic is that you attend worship services. Another characteristic is that you proselytize. And the Mormon faith is spread around the world because students spend a year proselytizing, say, in Africa, South America, or Europe, or America. I've answered the door many a time for some Mormon young men who want to tell me what the ultimate truth is. And then another characteristic that shows that you belong, because belonging, as I've said before, is very important, is that you visit the holy sites. I went to Nauvoo, not because I'm a Mormon, but out of utter curiosity in Illinois. And it was a brilliantly designed community, and it's worthy of a visit, because these early Mormons had figured out how to bring water off the Mississippi River to feed their crops. And so they had irrigation ditches. It's very interesting. And excellent homes. And they had planned to build a temple there in Nauvoo, but then Joseph Smith was killed and Brigham Young took them west. So now we get to an eighth factor, and that is a bit of ethnic superiority. While they allow blacks to be members across 100 years or so, they did not allow blacks until 1978 to become priests of their faith. If you study the history of Brigham Young in Utah, he was very ethnic conscious in terms of Native Americans as they took land away from the Indian tribes out in Utah. And also there is a woman is not going to be allowed to be a priest, at least during my lifetime. And so there's a superiority in being born a male. And they emphasize family, which usually means that the woman is taken care of and takes care of the home and the children. A ninth characteristic, a promise. So if you're a member of the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization and have your firm ideology, and you refer back to a leader and you refer back to different passages in their holy book, and you have a noble history of people who have stood up against the Crusaders, then you go on down till you give a promise to your Al-Qaeda members, and that is that they're going to win. They're going to take back Afghanistan. They're going to take over the Muslim world. And so there's hope given to some acolyte of a particular ideology. And then, of course, there is the promise of eternal life. And for those who sacrifice their lives in combat, there's a promise of multiple, I think it's 26 virgins when you get to heaven. Finally, there is a threat, and this completes the 10 aspects of the anatomy of an ideology. And that is, if you don't believe, you're in severe danger of going to hell. And they have a different word for hell, but it does mean eternal separation from God. And so that's all I want to point out now is these 10 aspects, criteria of any ideology. And later on I'll go different from religion and explain how these points are settled with other systems.